At the southern end of the Pennines, sandwiched between the cities of Manchester and Sheffield, lies the Peak District. The Peak District is located mainly in the county of Derbyshire, but there are also large areas in Staffordshire, Cheshire, South and West Yorkshire and Greater Manchester. The area is subdivided into the White Peak and the Dark Peak, each with its own quite distinct character. The White Peak lies within the area enclosed by the towns of Buxton, Castleton, Bakewell, Matlock and Ashbourne, and is a limestone plateau of green fields and white dry stone walls. To the north, along the eastern and western margins of this limestone plateau, lies the Dark Peak, open heather-clad moors of gritstone and shale with a peaty acid soil, a less hospitable area left to the sheep and grouse. Couple all this with a rich historical background of stately homes, show caves, ancient lead mines, picturesque watermills, a network of old packhorse ways, and numerous small towns and villages to explore, then it becomes clear why the Peak District is perhaps the most used national park in Britain. My very first visit to the Peak District was way back in 1986. And it was also the very first walking holiday I ever did on my own, outside of the Forest of Dean. This week I'm here rediscovering the very same journey that I did over 20 years ago. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the trip with me as I explore the wonderful Peak District. Buxton is a lovely Georgian spa town, steeped in history, an ideal base to begin my tour of the Peak District. Buxton is well known for its spa water, which can be sampled from St Anne's Well. The recently refurbished Opera House offers a wide-ranging programme to suit all tastes and ages. Buxton is famous for its literary and music festivals, based around the Opera House in the summer months. The refurbished Pavilion Garden is a Grade 2 listed building set in wonderful parkland. It is a venue for many events, which also has a restaurant and cafe bar. There used to be a youth hostel here, but it closed down just a few years ago. And that was a real shame, because I do remember that it was quite a nice place when I stayed here in 1986. Now, youth hosteling isn't something I'd want to do now, but when I was a teen it was ideal because it was cheap and cheerful and you got to meet so many different people. Now, when I stayed at Buxton, I can recall meeting 4 girls. 2 were from Barnsley and the other 2 were from Wolverhampton. Now, we all got on pretty well, and we all went on a pub crawl. It was great. So my first night in the Peak District was spent pub crawling around Buxton. Great stuff. This morning I left Buxton to set off for Edale. The path ran alongside the River Wye, and the further I walked, the more beautiful the scenery was. Now, this is not the same River Wye that I've known since I was very small, the one that flows into the River Severn near Chepstow. This River Wye is a different one, which starts near Buxton and flows into the River Derwent a few miles south of Bakewell. This is a very long way away from the River Wye near where I grew up. The first time I saw those stepping stones, it gave me the shock of a lifetime. I'd never seen anything like it before, ever. There I was, walking along a footpath beside the river, and all of a sudden the path completely disappears, and I've got no choice but to follow these stepping stones that are almost submerged by the river, with only a cliff on the one side to put my hand for some support. Very scary. Admittedly, today it doesn't look half as bad as I remember it to be. I'm sure that 20 years ago those stepping stones weren't as regimentally square as they are now, and I think the water levels were higher as well back then. So I don't know, maybe your mind plays tricks on you, but I think maybe the first time I discovered it, it was just quite a shock, really. Particularly that second stretch. It really was quite a bad stretch to cross, because some of those stones were just completely submerged in the water, and I just thought, I'm not going through that, you know. So I was determined to find another way through, but I couldn't. So in the end I just thought, stuff it. Took my boots off, my socks off, and just rolled my trouser legs up and went for it, stuff it. And I waded through to the other side. I was fine. It was an experience.
Millersdale was once an important railway junction, where passengers for Buxton joined or left the trains between London and Manchester on the old Midlands Railway. Since the railway was closed in 1970,
the station has become a car park, and Millersdale's importance has gone, except as a centre for exploring the local scenery. Leaving Millersdale, I followed a path leading me through Monksdale. The path was easy at first, but then it became rocky and difficult. The path continued through a wooded dale until the landscape became more open and wild. Mam Tor is a famous viewpoint and landmark, rearing up above the valleys of Hope and Edale. Known as the Shivering Mountain, it is comprised of shale, and the east face is a dramatic and loose expanse of crumbling rock. The triangulation point on the summit is placed on top of an old barrow, which probably dates from the Bronze Age. The views from the summit of Mam Tor are superb, with a fine view of Edale and Kinderscout to the north, and Hope Valley to the east, and a splendid ridge leading from the summit down to Hollins Cross and along to Loose Hill. I walked down to the village of Edale, which is also the name given to the valley between Monsal, Loose Hill and Kinderscout. Edale lies in a beautiful setting below Kinderscout, and it is a very popular centre for walkers and hikers, as it is the start of the Pennine Way, England's famous long-distance footpath. The thing I can remember about Edale Youth Hostel was it was just such a wonderful, well, the location was out of this world basically. Couldn't have asked for a better location for a youth hostel. But the hostel itself was just so really badly organised. I can remember arriving at the front door and there was a queue of people trying to get in, and I was in that queue for about an hour. It was ridiculous. And the next morning I remember getting up for breakfast. And normally in youth hostels in those days, there was always set times, you know, it was always like breakfast was served at 8:30. And you'd all sit down at the tables, everybody staying in the hostel would sit down on the tables together and you'd be served your breakfast. But this place was just like, I remember it was served between 7:30 and 8:30. And I just walked in, I wasn't sure what to do. And I just walked up to a guy behind the counter in the canteen and I said, can I have a fried breakfast please? So just like that he pulled out a plate of fried breakfast, almost like pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and it was probably just under the hot lamps for God knows how long, and I just thought, not too keen on this place really. It's such a shame, a really nice location for the hostel, but just not the best run place at all. Hey, there you go. Leaving Edale Youth Hostel, the walk across the hilly moors was beautiful. Now this is part of the Dark Peak, loved by ramblers who want to get away from it all, and the rock gymnasts who delight in scaling the many gritstone edges. But even this area is served by many minor roads, so that the less energetic can park easily and take a gentle stroll along the top of one of the edges with magnificent views over the surrounding countryside. Bradwell is a large working village nestling at the bottom of its own limestone dale, set in the glorious Hope Valley. Bradwell is surrounded by some fabulous countryside and is unusual for having both its own gritstone edge and limestone dale. Tideswell is a large, well-appointed village set in the limestone uplands south of Buxton. Tideswell has some fine old buildings and is a thriving community offering much more than first meets the eye. The magnificent church of St John the Baptist is justifiably known as the Cathedral of the Peak, built entirely in the 14th century. Tideswell was once important for its markets and was also a centre for a variety of local industries, including quarrying, lead mining, cotton and velvet mills. Today it continues to be a focal point for surrounding communities, with a small industrial estate, craft work, furniture and piano manufacture providing employment. Ravensdale Youth Hostel was nice. I can remember that being my third night in the Peak District. I was starting to find some familiar faces around, so basically it's because I'd seen some of the people staying at the previous two hostels I'd stayed in. There were a group of guys, for instance, that were at Ravensdale this night who had stayed at Edale the night before. Now, one thing I do remember particularly was when I sat down to have my evening meal with everybody else, was dropping the sugar basin and scattering sugar everywhere all over the bloody table. How to make yourself look a complete prat in front of everybody. I seem to remember spending all night wandering to and from the games room there in the lounge because I was feeling a bit restless. Whilst I was in the lounge I was sitting down writing a diary. Now I do remember, this is why I can remember this particular holiday quite well, back in '86, because I kept a diary. This night at Ravensdale I was writing the latest bits for the diary, and there was a Scottish guy who was sitting in the lounge and he was eating this apple whilst he was talking, which I really hate when people do that. He was like going so like that and spraying food everywhere, which I just really Anyway, he was quite an odd character. I can't describe it too well, but he sort of was questioning. He was sort of saying, why are you keeping a diary? And I said, well, because I want to. Why are you doing this? Why do you do that? And I thought, well, what is it with this guy? Just piss off, you know. Just mind your own bloody business. I'm not asking you why you're eating an apple and spraying apple sauce all over me, am I? The following morning, I rejoined the Monsal trail and walked through Water-cum-Jolly Dale. The Monsal trail runs for approximately 12 to 13 miles and follows the path of the former Midland Railway, beginning near Cheedale and ending just beyond the former station at Bakewell. For the most part, the trail follows the path of the River Wye, which means it offers some spectacular scenery. Reaching Monsaldale, I found myself walking onto one of the most prominent features on the Monsal Trail. This viaduct, measuring 100 yards across with 5 magnificent supportive arches, was built in Victorian times to allow the Midland Railway to cross overhead. Opened in 1863 to widespread criticism from those who felt it destroyed the beauty of Monsaldale, the viaduct remained in use for 100 years until it closed in 1968, later to be used as a cycleway and footpath as part of the Monsal Trail, and listed as a site of architectural and historical interest. Before continuing on my main route, I decided to take a short detour down Monsal Dale. Eventually I returned to the Viaduct, from where I climbed up to the viewpoint at Monsal Head. At the top I rested for a while, from where there was a lovely view of the Dale. It speaks for itself as to why so many people visit this part of the Peak District. Monsal Dale. What can I say about Monsal Dale? Well, basically it's become my favourite spot in the Peak District. Just an absolutely fantastic place. It's a spot that I like to go to just to blow the cobwebs away. It's just wonderful. It's just a place I never get tired of when I go there. When I was there in 1986, the thing I do remember on my first visit there was that it was snowing. Not heavily, and not where it was actually settling on the ground, but there was actually snow. So, it's quite a lot of rain actually when I was, the whole week I was there in the Peak District. It rained most of the time, and, whilst I was at Monsal Head, it snowed even, so there you go. I walked down the lane opposite the Monsal Head Hotel to pick up the Monsal Trail again at Little Longstone. It was only a few miles to Bakewell, and I didn't want to arrive there too early, so I decided to walk more slowly and leisurely in order to fully appreciate this wonderful countryside. Take it slow, I've plenty of time. Wonder what the next place is like. There's no need to hurry, it's not far away. Will it be as my mind told me? I'm walking on air, it smells like a dream. I'm drifting away to the world in
Today I feel young and free, a freedom that never leaves me. Today I feel young and free, I'm free in this private centre. By late afternoon, I finally arrived in the busy market town of Bakewell. The largest town in the Peak District National Park, Bakewell is best known for a confection made by mistake. In the 19th century, a cook at the Rutland Arms was baking a jam tart, but misunderstood the recipe, so the Bakewell pudding was created. Now almost every visitor to the town samples this culinary delight. The annual Bakewell Show is now much more than just an agricultural event. Held over 2 days in early August, it attracts thousands of visitors. Bakewell is never quiet for long. Well dressings, Carnival Week and an arts festival are all important dates in the calendar. Market Day is on Monday, when the town is at its busiest, and farmers' markets are held in the Agricultural Business Centre on the last Saturday of each month. I always laugh when I see those telephone boxes there because they remind me of when I very first had a stayed in Bakewell. I went into one of them and actually rang me mum, because I used to ring her up, in those days when I was still living at home, and telling her how the holiday was getting on, and I can remember actually phoning her. It was pissing down with rain that night in Bakewell, as it was raining most of the time I was in the Peak District that time, and I was telling her that it had snowed earlier that day when I was walking through Monsal Dale, so yes. The things I remember about when I stayed at Bakewell Youth Hostel, it was a very small hostel back then. Very tidy, very, very cosy place. I remember meeting this chap who was a very, very fit, he was a fitness instructor, and the morning after I stayed at Bakewell, he went for a run for several miles before he actually went on his walk, and I remember at breakfast he said to people, anybody want to come with me? And of course I said no thank you, just a walk was fine for me. But this young chap, I don't know, he was younger than me, he must have been about 15 or something, he actually sort of said, yeah, I'll come with you. Of course he came back with that guy absolutely knackered. He looked dreadful. I think he's probably trying to look tough with the guy, but he knackered himself out as a result. I climbed out of Bakewell the next morning and headed on towards my next impressive landmark of the Peak District. Chatsworth is the home of the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire and is one of Britain's best loved historic houses and estates. There is something here for everyone to enjoy, from famous works of art, young animals and the spectacular fountains in the garden, to the finest shopping, food and drink, and many miles of free walks. The house contains one of Europe's finest private art collections, representing 4,000 years of European culture and craftsmanship, from ancient Greece to modern work by British artists. These treasures are seen in magnificent rooms on all 3 floors of the house, from the grandeur of the first Duke's painted hall and state apartments, with their rich decoration and painted ceilings, to the 19th century library, great dining room and sculpture gallery.
medieval Conksbury Bridge carries the Youlgrave road across the River Lathkill. Here there are numerous fish ponds, and as I followed the river upstream, the valley became more steep-sided. Lathkill Dale is one of my favourite dales in the Peak District. It is one of the finest limestone dales, and the upper part is a National Nature Reserve in the care of English Nature. It is a famous trout fishing river, and Isaac Walton declared it to be the purest and most transparent stream he had ever seen. I left Lathkill Dale at this point to climb high above the limestone crags to cross the fields towards Youlgrave. Midway between Bakewell and Matlock, Youlgrave makes a good base for exploring the area. Its narrow streets and assortment of old buildings give it much character. Once a centre for lead mining for over 200 years, its magnificent church with splendid tower reflect the prosperity of those days. Now a thriving working community with a strong social scene, until quite recently it has a unique private water supply. Youlgrave Youth Hostel was very unique. It was in the old co-op store in the village, and I liked it there very much. It was a very basic hostel on the inside. It was quite grotty, if I remember rightly. Nothing special, but the warden was what made it what it was. He was a very welcoming and friendly guy, and I always remember back then, 20 years ago, I always used to pre-book all my accommodation weeks and weeks in advance before I was going anywhere on holiday. So when I was booking accommodation in youth hostels, I would send a letter to each youth hostel and then just saying I would like to book such and such a night's accommodation, and they would then send back a receipt in the post to you saying okay or not okay or whatever. So both youth hostels would just send you back the receipt. I remember when I got the receipt back from Youlgrave, I received a load of bump with the receipt as well, so they'd actually gone to the trouble of sending me some leaflets of the area, which was nice, and I thought that's a nicer touch really. And when I met the warden himself, yeah, he was really friendly. I remember there was an old guy with his grandsons there, I think. There weren't really many people staying in that hostel the night I was there, and I spent the night playing Monopoly with them, so that was quite interesting. This is just part of the limestone scenery of the White Peak, moorland country which is dissected by the rivers Derwent, Wye, Dove, Manifold and their offshoots to give the region's well-known dales, some of course with spectacular limestone rocks and cliffs.
It was way past midnight and she still couldn't fall asleep. This night the dream was leaving. She tried so hard to keep. And with the new day's dawning, she felt it drifting away. Not only for a cruise, not only for a day.
Back in 1986, that was the time before plastic was around, when you used to be able to, go to cash point and draw cash out, or just pay for anything over the counter with your plastic card. So back in those days, you had to either write a cheque out for things, or just go into the bank or post office and draw money out with a cheque. I can remember this particular day. I was desperate to get some cash. I was low on cash, and I needed to get some cash. And I remember getting to this signpost that said Parwich, 3.5 miles. It was 11:30, so that gave me about an hour to get to the post office in Parwich, because I thought, I bet the bloody thing will close at 12:30, like most of these village post offices do. So I remember running like shit down country lanes and fields to get to Parwich before it closed at lunchtime, and I just managed it. That was a bit of a panic for a while. But then I relaxed nicely afterwards by going into the Sycamore Inn and having a couple of pints of cider.
Feeling great but tiddly after leaving the pub at Parwich, I walked over the fields and up the hills to join the Tissington Trail. This trail runs along the course of an old railway that has been made into a footpath and cycleway, similar to the Monsal Trail. I walked along the Tissington Trail as far as Thorpe, where the atmosphere and scenery changed. It was lovely. Here I could see the start of Dovedale, where I was very much looking forward to walking through tomorrow. Ilam lies at the lower end of the River Manifold and is one of the prettiest villages in this area of the White's Peak. The Ports family established the first Ilam Hall in the 16th century, but it was torn down and rebuilt in grand style by Jessie Watts Russell in the 1820s. The main part of his hall was demolished in the 1930s, but the remaining section is a youth hostel, and the whole estate now belongs to the National Trust.
The warden at Ilam Hall Youth Hostel he had quite a dry sense of humour, I recall. I can't remember the sort of things he said, but I've still got this image in my mind of what he looked like and his expressions on his face. But he never smiled when he said things. He could be quite condescending when he said things to you, but I think there was a little bit of a twinkle there as well. So he was probably quite a nice chap, really. It was just a case of getting used to his humour. It was a great hostel. It was a huge place, huge, great dormitories. I really liked staying there. I remember lots of kids staying there as well, a lot of kids. Quite a lot of children that had mental illness as well, mental health, were staying there. But yeah, it was a very, very big, very busy youth hostel.
Dovedale is absolutely delightful, and is generally considered to be one of the most popular dales in the Peak District. It is easy to see why. However, if you are a walker who likes to get away from it all, this is probably not the best place to visit, as it is always busy with tourists. The River Dove forms the county boundary between Staffordshire and Derbyshire, and runs through a narrow limestone gorge
where steep tree-covered walls rise high above the stream. The main path through the dale runs along the Derbyshire side of the river, soon passing beneath the Lion's Head Rock, so named because of its likeness to the king of the beasts. Beyond that, the path runs past Ilam Rock, which rises sheer from the water's edge. At Millersdale, I crossed over the Dove back into Staffordshire using the famous packhorse bridge called Viaduct Bridge, Viaduct meaning traveller. Millersdale is a very picturesque and popular spot, named after a character in the second part of The Complete Angler by Isaac Walton. It is a tranquil, clustered riverside village of square stone cottages, surrounded by steeply wooded hills. The village is only visited by local traffic and walkers, lots of walkers. Continuing up the valley of the River Dove, I pass through Wolfscote and Beresford Dales, before eventually reaching Hartington. Hartington lies at the northern end of Dovedale, set in some of the very best walking country. The scenery in and around this charming old limestone village is outstanding, with a network of footpaths radiating from it. Hartington is centred around the spacious square, with the much photographed duck pond as a focal point. There is a good selection of gift shops, cafes and pubs, and there is a small pottery. The Hartington cheese factory is famous for its Stilton and other local cheeses, and there is a well-stocked factory shop. There are some fine old buildings, including the Charles Cotton Hotel, St Giles Church, the Market Hall, and Hartington Hall, now a very fine youth hostel. Hartington Hall Youth Hostel was wonderful. It really was. It was my favourite youth hostel in the Peak District. Everyone else was the same as well. I can remember when I met people in some of the previous nights in the Peak District. Those people that had actually stayed at Hartington, they all said that Hartington Hall was their favourite youth hostel. And when I stayed there this night, I could see why. It was just wonderful. It was a lovely hostel, had a lot of character, and it was very, very well run. It was it was the other end of the scale to Edale, the way it was run. Really, it was very well organised, and it was just great. And I think today I get the impression that it's still very well run, and I noticed that it's called the flagship youth hostel, so that's quite interesting. No, it really was. It was a fantastic place, and I'd actually like to go and stay there now again, just to see if it's the same as I remember it to be, because it really was an amazing place. next morning I left Hartington to walk along the High Peak Trail, and like the Monsal and Tissington trails, it is a disused railway that has been turned into a footpath and cycleway. Sterndale is a remote hill village surrounded by magnificent hills and dales overlooking the upper Dove Valley. Few villages have such spectacular scenery on their doorstep, with the distinctive limestone peaks of High Wealden, Crome and Parkhouse Hills nearby. There is also the bonus that this area is less well known and much quieter than the lower Dove. The most unusual feature in the village is the pub, called the Quiet Woman. The pub's sign is thought to depict one nagging wife known as Chattering Charteris. The story goes that her husband lost control one day and cut off her head, to the approval of the villagers. By late afternoon, I arrived at 3 Shires Head, the most interesting part of the walk today. 3 Shires Head is the meeting point of the counties of Derbyshire, Cheshire and Staffordshire. The River Dane rises about 2 miles above here and runs in a steep-sided valley at this point. The area is between 360 and 450 metres above sea level and is typical of the Cheshire uplands. From here, I followed the path running along the Staffordshire side of the River Dane and descended through some lovely countryside towards Gradbatch. I hadn't written much in my diary about my night at Gradbatch Mill, but again it was a nice place I can remember, and it's in a wonderful location, deep in the Dane Valley there. But I don't think I actually met anybody. I think there were lots of people staying there, but I don't think it was actually probably the only night I didn't actually get talking to anybody. So my memories of it are a bit dim, really. So. Leaving Gradbatch the next day, I crossed over the River Dane into Cheshire. This is the last part of my tour of the Peak District, exactly as it was 20 years ago, and I have been enjoying this walk no less than I did back then. After a while, I climbed over the moors towards the Cat and Fiddle Inn. This inn is the second highest pub above sea level in the UK, the first being the Tan Hill Inn in the Yorkshire Dales. This inn gives its name to the Cat and Fiddle Pass, a stretch of the A537, linking Macclesfield to the west with Buxton to the east, which features many sharp corners. This road became notorious for the high number of accidents, particularly amongst motorcyclists, for whom the road is often regarded as an exhilarating technical challenge. An AA survey in 2003 named it as the most dangerous stretch of road in the United Kingdom. Crossing back into Derbyshire, I descended from the Cat and Fiddle towards the Goyt Valley. The River Goyt rises on the moors of Axe Edge, near the River Dane and the Cat and Fiddle Inn. It flows northwards through steep rocky cloughs and is the main feeder for the Irwood and Fernilee reservoirs. In the Goyt Valley you can find high moorland, river and valley scenery, with the man-made additions of the Fernilee and Irwood reservoirs. By lunchtime, I was in the village of Fernilee, where I decided to revisit the local pub I remembered from my visit back in 1986. I've got to mention the Shady Oak Inn because I don't know why, but it just, maybe it was me being more impressionable at, such a younger age. But back in 1986, when I went into the Shady Oak for my lunch. And now the Peak District, bearing in mind that it's a national park and very touristy, I wouldn't like to sort of think how many walkers they get there every year. But I was in there having my lunch, and the waitress came over to bring my lunch to me, and she obviously noticed my walking boots, and she said, "Oh, where are you walking to?" And she was taking interest and asking me where I was going to and where I'd come from, and I thought, it's amazing. I mean, it was so lovely that she was so friendly, because I thought, well, she must get sick of all the tourists. I mean, there's so many visitors to the Peak District. So, but she still went out of her way to ask me and take an interest in where I was going, and that's why I remember the Shady Oak so well. It just really nice. And I remember actually talking to a couple of people on the next table to me who were they lived locally. They were retired. I think the guy was a beekeeper or something, but I just found people really friendly there. It was lovely. So, I tend to remember things like that. So. After lunch at the Shady Oak, I slowly made my way back to Buxton, where this tour began. So I was back in Buxton for my final night in the Peak District, where I started my holiday. And the young assistant warden remembered me, and he said, "Oh, have you had a good week?" And I said, "Yeah, it's been fantastic, despite the rain most of the time." So there were a load of school kids that were there, that had been staying there the first night I was there. There was a couple of them that remembered me from my first night. It was this little shit called Martin, I remember, who was also annoying this other group of people that were staying there on this final night. There was a group of Germans staying there, about 30 odd Germans who were part of a brass band. I got talking to a couple of them. I got quite friendly with a couple of them, if I'm honest, and one doesn't like to blow one's own trumpet, but I think a couple of those German girls were taking more than a passing interest in me. Well, if no other bugger will say it, I've got to, haven't I? So there was a girl called Andrea, and she was definitely interested, if I'm honest. And hey, you can usually tell, can't you? But it was all innocent fun, and we were just talking. We played Connect 4, I think, with each other, and it was quite a good night. I didn't go out into Buxton like I did on my first night there when I met those 4 girls from Bowles in Wolverhampton. But you know, I had quite an entertaining night with the Germans inside the hostel, so it was a nice night, nice final night in the Peak District. So, that's the Peak District. Well, part of it anyway. There's still a lot more to see. But more importantly, the Peak District is now the place where I'm currently living. I think the next stage is to meet some of the local people.